Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. Want to thank previous guest Robert Rutley from Mott & Chase, who joined us earlier. As the housing market continues to explode, new numbers out today, the median single-family house jumped another 16% year over year and is now at $384,000 for the average house in Rhode Island. It's about 100% increase in the last 10, 11 years. So quite a remarkable story. And then also I want to thank Professor Kelly over at Providence College. He talked about the micro MBA program, a wildly interesting class for those who are entrepreneurs or startups who want to get a good foundation on just about everything in business. But let's go to Dr. Priya Banerjee. She is one of the top forensic experts in the United States, a Rhode Islander. You may have seen her on CNN or MSNBC. Priya, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start at the national level. You have been a bit of a constant in some of the talking head national shows. Talk about your experience, who you've talked to, and what the cases have been that you've been brought in to give expert commentary.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think there's been a sort of trend, in following court cases, especially those with death involved. That's where a forensic pathologist like myself gets involved. So I've been sort of all over the place, but most recently, the most prominent national case that I commented on was the Derek Chauvin George Floyd trial, and that's because, in that case in particular, we know that the cause of death, the autopsy, that was such a heavy element of the case. That's where, people really understood what medical examiners do. So it was helpful to have, I guess, an outside person like myself who's not directly involved in the case comment and explain what do all these medical terms even mean.
And you were on CNN and MSNBC. What was the best question you received? And we don't have to call out anyone. And what was the most absurd question you've been asked in any of these expert segments?
That's hard. I think absurd, I don't have anything that crazy. I think people are pretty smart. I think people just don't understand what an autopsy is. And sometimes I think they think I'm like this genie, who can see in a bottle and tell them everything. I think there's always like, did the person see their killer in their eyes? Like, can you look at the corneas and the reflection? And I'm like, no, that's very much like the movies or TV. It's not as glamorous or instantaneous. That's probably the biggest thing that I fight, like the CSI effect, I call it. Everything doesn't wrap up in an hour and magically come together.
Talk a little bit, you've worked here in Rhode Island. You're a consultant now to the Department of Health. So you're doing work around the country and doing consulting work. But talk a little bit about how the world changed during this pandemic. I think most of you all who have been in top tier public health positions knew a pandemic was likely to come of some kind or another, never quite knowing if it's going to be sort of SARS-like or Ebola or what the dimension would be. But all of you have been warning us for a better part of a decade that something complex was going to come our way in our public health. How has COVID sort of changed healthcare and public health?
I mean, that's such a loaded question.
We only ask loaded questions here.
I think behind the scenes, like the part about forensic pathology, medical examiner work that really intrigues me is what's called emerging trends, whether that's new drugs on the street or new infections. I mean, we sadly see people die all the time. And if it's an unexplained death, sometimes we're at the forefront of detecting whether it's a new infection, again, detecting a new drug to warn the public. So we're always ready. And the medical examiner's office is under CPR, the Center for Emergency Preparedness. And, different states are structured differently. But we all sort of have that responsibility of caring for the public and watching out for emerging trends. I still think, we were prepared. We had great PPE. I think the Department of Health did an amazing job. Personally, like as a medical examiner, I never felt exposed. I mean, there's an unknown risk, but I did have the PPE I needed. And, I was lucky in contrast to some of my clinical colleagues where PPE was short. And I think that goes to say with the preparedness aspect of it, but really no one could predict, I think, the magnitude and the ongoing issues we're facing. I mean, not only am I a physician, I'm a mom, so you can see where it's come from, and it's not ending, right? We're back in another school year. What do we do with the kids? Some of us are lucky to be vaccinated. My child, for example, is under 12, so she's not able to be, and there's this flux that I feel is going around. So we're sort of evolving along with this pandemic. I think Dr. Fine or other epidemiologists, people who deal with the clinical side of things would probably agree. Again, we're not omniscient, but we try to keep up with the times and prevent the most critical illnesses and prevent death if possible.
Are you surprised, thinking over the last 18 months, the depth of this, the length of it, and correspondingly, do you worry about the next variant, whether it's Lambda or some of the others that are emerging around the world that are more complex even than the Delta? In the case of the Lambda disseminating out of Peru, it seems to be a more deadly variant, and potentially the vaccines don't have the same impact on it.
100%. So not only do I do the consulting, as you mentioned, just out of personal interest and medical education, I belong to multiple groups of physicians regarding COVID, COVID rates, COVID infections, treatments, et cetera. And, we share information, articles are being published rapidly. But I think the scariest part is the unknown, right? I think 18 months ago, if you told me that, this virus was going to emerge, I would have told you that's like a movie, right? Like it's so theoretical that the world is shutting down. I mean, right? People are working from home. Things aren't happening like normal. This was inconceivable to me, not only as a physician, but just a member of society,
Right.
And now it seems like we've sort of come full circle because, yes, we're in a better position of understanding the baseline variant or baseline virus. But as you said, there's all these variants. I mean, viruses mutate, right? We know this about viruses. They rapidly mutate. HIV, hepatitis, all these viruses that we're really familiar with and treating, we still know they mutate rapidly. And the scary thing is, what if the mutation makes it more virulent, which means more infectious, like the Lambda variant? We're just learning about it, but in my groups, there's been lots of talk about how Lambda is more infectious and less prevented by the vaccine. So now, I'm not an immunologist or vaccine researcher, but it's a challenge for them to keep up with that kind of treatment, right? That's why the flu vaccine comes out every year. They predict which variant is going to be infectious, but I don't know that we know enough about COVID to have that same projection.
Yeah, I don't know, probably a year ago, I was doing a show with Dr. Fine, and usually we go over the questions beforehand. This one I had not, and I said, when will we have some good baseline information about the behavior of this disease, expecting him to say, in 3 to 6 months. And he said, well, in the short term, it'll be about 3 years. In the long term, it'll be about 20 years. That's how long it takes to really understand these types of diseases.
He's completely accurate. And, 18 months has already played out, right?
Right.
3 year, we're already 50% into his 3-year prediction. And I think he's right. We're just learning about the basics.
Talk a little bit about the trends you're seeing in forensics. What's becoming, during the course of your career, just advanced tremendously? What advantage is that having to society, public health, et cetera? And what are the areas that are still frustrating for you?
So, forensic pathology pathology specifically is just one component of forensics. And autopsy is still the gold standard. And I think the frustrating part I see is not so much from the medical examiner side, because we are mandated by law to accept cases for that. But hospitals have really, the hospital autopsy rate has really gone down. And it doesn't matter how good your scans are, 3D modeling, seeing it, you know, both with your naked eye and under the microscope gives you the utmost understanding of disease in the human body. And so I think it's a disservice to not have autopsies, especially if someone dies of a disease. Like, we learned so much about COVID from, first and foremost, from autopsy cases, that clots were forming in the lungs. We needed to, put them on blood thinners. All this kind of stuff was all autopsy data, so it's not just in violent deaths or unexpected deaths, even natural disease deaths like a virus infection. We can learn so much from it. Sadly, I think the ongoing trend still, we see a lot of drug overdose deaths. I'm hoping that can turn into some prevention type interventions. And really just the understanding of injuries has come a long way. We're still the experts in determining that. And I think that is complemented by DNA advances. If anywhere in forensics has come so far, it's DNA. So I can gather evidence, and I gather everything, because you don't know what's going to be useful. And I don't know if it's going to be useful tomorrow or 10 years from now, right? Because even some of the cases that I've worked on, like Project Innocence, whatnot, back in the day, like in the 80s when the crime happened, the technology wasn't there, but now it's there to exonerate someone. So that to me has been really, really critical of tying forensic pathology to advances in forensics overall.
And on that project, which I think is well known, it's helped clear dozens and dozens, if not hundreds. How many cases did you work on that the science you helped identify helped lead to a reversal of an individual's fate?
I've only worked on a few of their cases, but I'm actively working on one now that is an out-of-state case, but it is definitely exonerated the person who had been improperly jailed for it. And, I don't always know the end point. I might be involved in the process, but I do offer my services pro bono because I do believe in it. I don't want someone potentially, if they're wrongfully convicted, to have finances be the limiting factor in justice.
Right.
So,
of course.
I just really believe in the cause. And then, sometimes it's good to just be a cog in the wheel and not know the end point, because I'm giving an independent review. I have no other, benefit, if you will, and hopefully they can do with it what they need.
Doctor, talk a little bit about your career now. It's wildly interesting. You're playing the national media game. You're working as a consultant here in Rhode Island to the Department of Health, and which I didn't know. You told me before we came on. You're working in Las Vegas, and other aspects. Walk us through all these different touch points.
Sure. So it's interesting. My career is definitely involved. I came to the state from Maryland originally, and built my career here as a state forensic pathologist. Only recently have I transitioned to a broader spectrum of practice. So now I'm in private practice for myself, but I'm still very thrilled to be a contracted forensic pathologist for the state. So I still get to work with my colleagues who I love. They're like my family at the office. I still work part-time there. I'm going to be working part-time in Las Vegas, as you said. They're very short doctors, so they were eager to have someone with experience come over and help them with cases. And so that'll be probably approximately 50% of my work. It can be very busy, especially when you're short-staffed in offices. And the short staffing is sort of prevalent throughout the country. We're just not that plentiful. And then I also do lots of legal consulting, as we talked about. I do both criminal and civil consulting, as well as teaching. I teach in the graduate program at BU. I used to teach at Roger Williams. So, And I'm still like a clinical adjunct professor at Brown University, Rhode Island Hospital pathology program. So teaching is really where my heart lies too, because as you can tell, I love to talk, and I'm really passionate about forensics. So I like sharing that information with people who are interested.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a complete novice question.
Sure.
CIS or Law and Order, which?
Ooh. Huh. So
Who?
CSI, I think, is so, the science is so out there. I like the drama of Law and Order. I actually had taken a resident to court one time, and we had a kerfuffle, unrelated to me. I was just in the audience with her, and she was like, we had to take a recess, or the court took a recess, and she was like, wow, this is like Law and Order. And I was like, not really, but to her, it was very exciting. So I think that trumps the Law and Order kind of show. Obviously, it's been wildly successful, right? It's been on forever.
Listen, you're great to take the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wildly interesting. We hope we can touch base with you in the future as these things continue to develop. If folks are interested in sort of this element of science, how should they get smart about this?
Well, I think, TV's for entertainment. You got to remember that. There's a lot of studying. Anybody in the forensic field that I even teach and they've gone on to be scientists. As they've grown up in front of me, I like to say, they are, again, hardcore scientists. They're biology, chemistry majors that have gone on to obtain master's degrees, and then lots of on-the-job training. For the average individual, I think, just reading. There's still a lot of information on the internet. Check your sources, but I think you can learn a lot that way as well.
Listen, thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate you taking the time. For everybody else, stay tuned. We'll have Dr. Michael Fine on. The latest numbers, transmission rate here in Rhode Island is now approaching 200 cases per 100,000. Of course, Rhode Island's action level is at 100. Hospitalizations pierced over 100 again, sadly. That's about a five-fold increase in the past 30, 35 days. So we'll have much more on that. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, please get it done. There's just no more excuses. It's sad to watch these stories about people who intended to, wanted to, and have passed away because of this virus. Thanks, everybody.